What if a single word could destroy everything you are? Strip you of your dignity, your name, your family, even your right to live? Among the Vikings, that word existed. It was feared, it was final, and it could kill without a blade. That word was Arg, and to be called it was not just an insult, it was a death sentence. Stay with me until the end, because what happened to these condemned men will haunt you long after their names are forgotten. In Viking society, masculinity wasn't just a cultural standard. It was law, identity, and survival. Everything a man had, his honor, his bloodline, even his legal existence, hinged on being seen as masculine. Strength, bravery, self-control, and violence when needed, these weren't optional traits. They were the foundations of Norse manhood. And then there was Argra, a word that didn't just question your masculinity, it obliterated it. Argra meant unmanly, but not in the way we might think today. It carried connotations of weakness, deviance, shame. To be accused of being Arger was to be labeled a coward, a passive participant in male same-gender relations, or, perhaps worst of all, a man who practiced savor, Norse sorcery. Magic, though powerful and respected when performed by women, was seen as utterly degrading for men. It inverted their expected role. Even the god Odin in the Ynglinga saga was criticized for practicing Sather, a divine, untouchable figure, but still shamed by men for stepping outside gender norms. A man should not deal with it without shame. In this world, to call a man Arg was not casual slander. It was a formal accusation, a nid, and it carried serious legal weight. If you were accused, you had to answer, fast. The response? A fight, a duel to the death, known as Holmganga, ritual combat to prove your masculinity. And if you refused, that silence was your confession. The consequences of silence. In 10th and 11th century Iceland, a man who did not defend himself from being called Arg was labeled an outlaw, a legal designation with terrifying consequences. There were two levels of outlawry: lesser outlawry, exile for 3 years with a chance to return; full outlawry, or Skoggangr, permanent expulsion, the equivalent of erasure. To be sentenced to Skoggangr meant more than just exile. You were cast out from humanity. You could no longer enter towns. You could not live under a roof. No one was allowed to feed you, shelter you, or even speak with you. You could not trade, worship, marry, or appeal to the law. Your existence was no longer protected by society, by gods, or by name. Anyone could kill you, and no one would be punished. Let that sink in. Your death became legal, expected, and encouraged. And your family? They would not mourn you. They couldn't afford to. To be a needing, a man without honor, a man who had lost drengskap, the Norse code of masculine virtue. It wasn't just what you did, it was what your identity represented. If you practiced magic, if you were perceived as effeminate, if you didn't retaliate to insult, you weren't just failing the warrior ideal, you were polluting it. You were no longer a man. You were no longer a citizen. You were outside the law, and worse, outside of memory. The forest as a grave. This is where the Skoggangr becomes more chilling. The term means go into the forest, but not in the poetic sense. It meant leave civilization, walk into the cold woods, and never return. There you were to die, slowly, painfully, and invisibly. No funeral rites, no memorial stones, no name on the family tree. You were not dead, you were unmade. The Gragas, the medieval Icelandic law code, laid this out clearly. A man declared an outlaw, an utlagi, could be killed on sight. The killer would owe nothing. In fact, in some cases, the killer could even claim the outlaw's property. He who kills an outlaw shall not pay weregild. That was the law. And the fear wasn't just personal. The dishonor infected your entire bloodline. Families would erase you from history, not out of hatred, but out of necessity. The deeper horror. In the saga of Grettir Asmundsson, we see one of the most powerful portrayals of outlawry. Condemned and cast out, he lives in the wilderness for years, hunted, hungry, hallucinating. He becomes less a man, more a shadow. Eventually he is killed, but in truth he died long before that moment, when society had already declared his life invalid. This fate of being invisible, erased, not even hated, but simply denied, is arguably worse than death. Memory as legacy. To understand the full weight of Viking outlawry, we need to understand how the Norse viewed memory. Among the Norse, to be remembered was to live on. Lineage wasn't a backdrop, it was your identity. Your worth came from who your father was, which clan you belonged to, what your ancestors had done in battle, in law, in loyalty. Genealogies were recited, sagas were sung, stones were carved, names echoed through generations, unless you were deemed unmanly. The erasure. If a man was accused of ergi, unmanliness, and didn't defend himself, his punishment wasn't just outlawry or death, it was deletion. Family sagas and genealogical texts from Iceland routinely skip over or truncate the lineage of such men. Their names are omitted, their stories are cut short, their children, if any, are stripped of claim to honor. This wasn't accident, it was design. To be associated with an Arg man was to invite shame upon generations. His very memory became a threat. To keep their lineage clean, families erased him. Why erase a man? Because in Norse culture, dishonor was contagious. If your great-uncle was declared Arg, it could affect your marriage prospects, sabotage your inheritance rights, damage your standing at the Thing, the Norse legal assembly. Honor wasn't just personal, it was collective, so dishonor had to be cut off like a rotting limb. And so, a man once born into a proud clan could find himself disavowed, disowned, and finally denied as if he had never drawn breath. Not forgotten, forbidden. These men were not simply lost to time, they were intentionally made invisible. Unlike fallen warriors who were immortalized in verse and stone, those accused of ergi became ghosts. No gravestone, no saga, no place in the family tree. The Norse didn't whisper their names, they never said them again. And if they had children, those descendants would often lie about their ancestry or see themselves cut off from rights entirely. A society that policed masculinity. This wasn't just about one word, Arg, or one man's fate. It revealed something foundational about Viking culture. To be a man was sacred. To fail that ideal was heresy. The Norse didn't rehabilitate unmanly men. They didn't imprison them. They cast them out, let them die, and wiped them from memory. Because the threat wasn't physical, it was ideological. These men violated the code. They blurred the boundaries. They reminded society that gender, power, and order were not as solid as they pretended, and that made them dangerous. The law still killed them after death. One of the most chilling aspects of this system is that the punishment didn't end when the man died. The outlaw, was not given rights. No one sang for him. His name was not written on wood or stone. His memory was the final casualty. Killing such a man wasn't a crime. It was an act of civic order. In fact, the law often rewarded it. He who kills an outlaw shall not pay weregild. Not only were you free of guilt, sometimes you got to claim his property. From legend to law and into the present. As horrifying as these laws were, they tell us something essential. The Norse weren't just obsessed with masculinity, they legislated it. They turned honor into a legal status. They weaponized shame, and they made manhood into a standard so rigid it could kill. But before we judge them too harshly, maybe we should ask, how different are we? Personal reflection. We may not banish people to forests or erase their names from family trees, but we still decide who counts, who gets protected, who gets remembered, who is real enough, strong enough, masculine enough. We still ridicule the soft-spoken, still distrust the ones who don't fit the mold, still treat deviation from gender norms as a moral defect, not a personal truth. The Vikings did it with blades and laws. We do it with algorithms, jokes, and exclusion. Masculinity, forged in cold iron, still casts a long shadow. What do you think? Which modern beliefs about gender and honor are echoes of these ancient laws? Leave your thoughts below. And remember the Old Norse verse from the Havamal. Cattle die, kinsmen die, one day you yourself will die, but a noble name will never die, if good renown one gets. Will your name be remembered or erased?